Imagine, like putting a 7-year-old on heavy psychiatric drugs just because he can't sit still in class.
Right.
The teachers are saying he's disruptive, he's constantly fidgeting, he has zero focus. So the doctors do what doctors do, right? They diagnose him with severe attention deficit disorder, and they hand over a prescription for a really powerful Schedule 7 stimulant.
Which is standard procedure.
Exactly. But then, a year later, after these drugs completely fail to fix the problem, and actually they end up triggering epileptic seizures, they finally decide to do a proper brain scan.
And what they find is incredible.
It's insane. They don't find a chemical imbalance at all. They find a literal tapeworm cyst.
A physical parasite.
Lodged right inside his brain.
Physically causing all that hyperactivity. So today, we are basically tearing apart the conventional medical consensus on attention, focus, and what we generally call bad behavior. We are looking at a completely, entirely different paradigm. Yeah, that specific case study from Cape Town really is the perfect entry point into the material we're examining today. Because what we're looking at is this massive, comprehensive stack of writings and protocols from a South African organization called NatureFresh Health Products.
Right.
And it's authored primarily by a healthcare researcher named Sue Visser. And the overarching philosophy here, the whole vibe, is that modern medicine is often treating the smoke while just completely ignoring the fire.
Oh, I like that. Treating the smoke.
Yeah. We are going to explore their highly provocative theories on the root causes of ADD, ADHD, and even just everyday brain fog.
Yeah.
But, crucially, we have to note right up front, the views, the biological interpretations, and the alternative remedies we are unpacking today belong entirely to the author of the source text.
Yes, that is a super vital point for you, the listener, to keep in mind. We are just your guides through this really fascinating and honestly often controversial text. We aren't endorsing these viewpoints. We aren't taking political or medical sides, and we absolutely aren't offering medical advice.
Exactly.
Our job in this deep dive is just to report on the author's alternative framework completely impartially, so you can understand a profoundly different way of looking at human neurobiology, because the author completely challenges the standard pharmaceutical model.
The one that relies heavily on amphetamines.
Right. And they replace it with this massive interconnected web of nutritional, environmental, and holistic strategies.
And to do that, the author asks us to zoom out. Instead of just looking at, isolated neurotransmitters in a kid's brain, they're looking at the entire ecosystem.
Like everything.
Everything. What we eat for breakfast, the agricultural chemicals spread on our crops, the radiation from our devices, and even the emotional environment of our homes.
It is a wild ride. I mean, we are going to see how a simple mango might literally mathematically replace a trendy, expensive CBD oil.
That part is fascinating.
It really is. And we're going to dive into how the human brain's internal brake system gets completely hijacked by a common weed killer. But before we get to that microscopic level, we need to talk about how the author fundamentally reclassifies these disorders.
Right, the definition itself.
Yeah, because usually we think of childhood ADD, the kid bouncing off the classroom walls is this completely different universe from the 40-year-old adult experiencing a midday brain fog crash.
But the source text rejects that separation entirely.
Really? They say it's the same thing.
Exactly the same. The author argues that childhood attention deficits and adult brain fog are living on the exact same continuum. They are just different manifestations of the identical underlying neurochemical problem.
Wow. And when you look at the symptoms the text lists for both side by side, it is actually kind of shocking how much they mirror each other.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we are talking about slow thinking, an absolute inability to initiate or finish projects, getting constantly derailed by phone apps, profound forgetfulness, spatial confusion, and just like a general hazy feeling.
And the author notes that these primary symptoms are rarely isolated. Like, they don't just get brain fog.
Yeah.
They are almost always accompanied by this whole cascade of secondary issues.
Like what?
Things like chronic fatigue, unexplainable irritability, anxiety, mild depression, tension headaches, and severe insomnia. The fundamental argument here is that whether you are 7 years old or 47, your brain is experiencing a catastrophic failure to sustain sharp, focused activity.
So the brain is essentially malfunctioning.
Right.
Okay, I have to push back here right away, though.
Yeah.
Because if the brain is malfunctioning on such a massive scale across so many different age groups, why aren't we seeing massive, obvious brain damage on MRIs? I mean, what is fundamentally breaking the system if it's not a genetic hardware defect?
Well, according to the source, the primary culprit isn't genetic at all. It's environmental.
Yeah.
And it actually starts right at the breakfast table.
Breakfast.
Yeah. The author uses a highly descriptive, somewhat terrifying term for this. They call it hypoglycemic dementia.
Hypoglycemic dementia. Okay, that sounds intense.
It does. And to understand it, we have to walk through the biochemical chain of events that the text outlines. It really starts with how the modern diet interacts with our human evolutionary biology.
Okay, set the scene for me. What does this look like in a typical morning?
All right, picture a child, or even an adult, getting ready for work, consuming a classic modern breakfast. A large bowl of sugar-coated cereal, maybe some white toast with jam, and a big glass of sweetened fruit juice.
Right. So just carbs on carbs.
Exactly. This meal is overwhelmingly composed of simple carbohydrates, with almost zero healthy fats, protein, or dietary fiber.
It's just a pure, unadulterated sugar bomb hitting the stomach.
Which is exactly the problem.
Yeah.
Because there is no fiber or fat to slow down the digestive process, those simple carbohydrates are instantly converted into glucose and dumped super rapidly into the bloodstream.
Okay.
Now, human biology evolved over millions of years to handle very slow, steady trickles of energy from complex, fibrous foods.
Like roots and berries and stuff.
Right. So when the body detects this massive, sudden spike in blood sugar, it interprets it as a literal biological crisis. The blood is literally becoming too thick, too syrupy.
Oh, wow. So the body just hits the panic button.
Pancreas hits the panic button. It pumps out an enormous, exaggerated wave of the hormone insulin. And insulin's job is to act like a key, right? Unlocking the body's cells so they can absorb that glucose out of the blood and bring the sugar levels back down to a safe baseline.
But let me guess, because the spike was so aggressive, the insulin response is equally aggressive.
Exactly.
It overshoots the landing.
It pulls out far too much glucose, far too quickly, which leads to a severe physiological crash. Usually this happens mid-morning, around maybe 10 or 10:30, a couple of hours after that sugary breakfast.
Right, the classic mid-morning slump.
Yeah, but blood sugar levels don't just return to normal here. They plummet dangerously low. And this is where the brain gets involved, because the human brain is a massive energy hog.
It takes up a lot of fuel, right?
A ton. It represents only about 2% of our total body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of our daily glucose. It relies almost exclusively on a steady stream of glucose for fuel.
So when the blood sugar plummets, the fuel line is effectively cut.
The brain begins to starve. And when an organ that vital is starving, it doesn't just casually keep running until it fails. It initiates a strict emergency triage protocol.
It starts shutting things down.
Exactly. Starts shutting down the higher level cognitive functions, the very systems required for abstract thought, sustained attention, emotional regulation, and short-term memory.
Oh man, okay, let's unpack this. It's exactly like your smartphone battery dropping to 1%.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. When you hit that critical low battery warning, the phone doesn't just keep playing high-definition video normally until the screen goes black. The operating system immediately intervenes.
Goes into low power mode.
Exactly. It starts shutting down all the non-essential background apps. It dims the screen brightness to 0. It stops fetching new emails. It sacrifices your memory and your focus apps just to keep the core basic operating system alive so the phone can still make an emergency call.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the source's concept of hypoglycemic dementia.
Yeah.
The brain is dimming the screen. The temporary confusion, the dizzy feelings, the moodiness, the absolute inability to concentrate on a math worksheet or a spreadsheet at the office, that is the brain entering survival mode to conserve energy.
But wait, the body can't just leave the blood sugar at dangerously low levels indefinitely, right? Because that leads to a coma.
Right, hypoglycemic shock.
So how does the body fix the 1% battery problem without a charger?
Well, it has to find an emergency backup supply of sugar somewhere inside the body. The liver actually stores a backup form of glucose called glycogen, but the liver won't just release it casually. To force the liver to dump that glycogen into the bloodstream and save the brain, the central nervous system has to sound the ultimate internal alarm. It commands the adrenal glands to flood the body with adrenaline.
Adrenaline, the core hormone of the fight-or-flight response.
Yes. The body is biochemically reacting as if it is literally being chased by a predator, because a severe drop in blood sugar is perceived as a life-threatening event.
And this is the massive aha moment in the text for me. Because what does a sudden massive surge of adrenaline look like in a 7-year-old boy who is forced to sit still at a wooden desk?
It looks like unruly, boisterous, highly impulsive, fidgety behavior.
Exactly.
It manifests as abnormal mental and physical restlessness. The child might become aggressive or entirely unmanageable.
It looks exactly like the clinical definition of hyperactivity. The author is literally arguing that we are looking at a child whose brain is starving for fuel, whose body is pumping them full of emergency adrenaline just to keep them from passing out from low blood sugar,
Yeah.
and we are diagnosing that perfectly logical biological survival mechanism as a permanent behavioral disorder.
That's their exact argument.
We are looking at the 1% low battery warning and diagnosing it as a permanent, unfixable hardware defect.
And the author states this explicitly. They argue that the body's natural mechanism of stimulating the release of adrenaline to raise blood sugar is being fundamentally misclassified by modern medicine.
It's wild.
They even draw a parallel to emergency medicine. They point out that if a severe diabetic lapses into a hypoglycemic coma, one of the fastest clinical ways to raise their blood sugar, aside from a direct intravenous glucose drip, is to trigger an adrenaline response. The biology is well understood, but the author believes its application to childhood behavior has been completely ignored.
And the text points out that this becomes a vicious cycle, right? Because kids who lack certain underlying nutrients, the ones that help regulate blood sugar and brain function, often become what we call fussy eaters.
Right.
They actively, aggressively crave the exact things causing the problem.
Yeah, the author outlines a very specific cascade of nutritional deficiencies found in children who present with learning and behavioral disorders. They detail a profound lack of essential minerals like calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper, and iron,
Wow, that's a lot.
alongside severe deficiencies in B-complex vitamins and essential fatty acids.
But how does lacking a mineral like, say, zinc turn a kid into a junk food addict?
Well, the text specifically links a zinc deficiency to a loss of taste acuity and a ravenous craving for quick energy. Zinc is crucial for hundreds of enzymatic reactions in the body,
Oh, I didn't know that.
including those that manage blood sugar and neurotransmitter production. So when a child is deficient, their body craves immediate, simple energy. So they crave sweets, refined carbohydrates, and fizzy drinks.
Which sets up the cycle. The child lacks the nutrient, so they crave the sugar.
Yeah.
The sugar causes the massive insulin spike. The insulin causes the severe crash. The crash starves the brain.
And the starving brain triggers the adrenaline.
Right. The adrenaline causes the hyperactivity. And through all of this, the underlying mineral deficiency is never actually addressed.
Never. And if you accept this paradigm, that these chaotic behaviors are simply the outward symptoms of a starving, nutrient-depleted brain running purely on emergency stress hormones, it completely illuminates why the source material is so fiercely, almost violently opposed to the conventional medical treatments for ADD.
Oh, man. Which brings us to the most controversial section of the text, the Ritalin pipeline.
Yeah, this part is heavy.
The author does not hold back at all.
Yeah.
They equate giving Ritalin to a child with giving them dangerous street drugs. They explicitly claim that over 80% of today's cocaine and speed addicts took Ritalin while they were at school.
And to grasp why the author takes such a highly uncompromising stance against methylphenidate, which is the generic name for Ritalin and other amphetamine-based prescription drugs, we have to look closely at how the text explains the physiological mechanism of these medications.
Okay, let's break it down.
Because the conventional psychiatric view is that stimulants help increase the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, which supposedly improves focus and executive function in a brain that is lacking those chemicals.
So the author rejects that entirely. They say it's just a trick of the nervous system.
A total trick. The author argues that Ritalin doesn't fix a deficiency at all. It merely forces the entire sympathetic nervous system into overdrive.
And the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight one.
Exactly. It's the biological network responsible for our fight or flight response. When you introduce an amphetamine, the author argues, you are alerting every system in the body to react as if it is under imminent, lethal attack.
Wait, so the child who is suddenly staring intently at their math book isn't experiencing sudden cognitive clarity, they are experiencing terror.
According to the text, what we perceive as focus is actually hypervigilance. The body is reacting to a perceived crisis. The source lists the physical realities of what happens to a human body in this chemically induced state. The heart rate accelerates drastically. Blood pressure rises. Muscle tension increases throughout the body.
And pain perception is completely dulled.
Right.
They even mention that digestion completely stops, blood begins to clot, and the bladder retains urine. That's insane.
But biologically, it makes sense. If you are sprinting away from a lion on the savannah, Your body cannot waste precious energy digesting lunch or processing urine.
No, you just need to run.
Exactly. It redirects all blood flow to the muscles in the brain for immediate survival. The author argues that the perceived cognition sharpening is just the amphetamine forcing that adrenaline release, which forces the liver to release the stored glycogen, raising the blood sugar.
So you aren't curing a learning deficit. You are literally forcing the child's body into a state of extreme, sustained physiological stress just to achieve a temporary behavioral result.
That is the core of their argument.
And the long-term consequences they lay out are incredibly dark. I mean, they dedicate a large portion of the text to a tragic anecdote about a boy named Jack.
Yeah, the story of Jack.
It's presented as a factual case study. Jack was supposedly just a normal kid who experimented with a friend's Ritalin at school just for kicks. But because the Ritalin caused severe underlying restlessness and anxiety, he turned to daga, which is a local term for cannabis, just to calm his nervous system down.
And the text uses Jack's story to illustrate the concept of receptor downregulation and chemical dependency.
Okay, what does receptor downregulation mean?
Well, when you flood the brain with massive artificial surges of neurotransmitters using a Schedule 7 stimulant, the brain attempts to protect itself from overstimulation. It reduces its own natural production of those chemicals and reduces the number of active receptors.
Oh, I get it. The local factories shut down because of all the cheap imports.
That is a great way to visualize it. And when the artificial stimulant wears off, the brain is left with a severe deficit. It can no longer function normally on its own. It requires the drug just to reach baseline.
So this creates actual physical dependence.
Exactly. Over time, as the brain adapts further, tolerance builds, meaning the doses must be continually increased to achieve the same effect. In Jack's case, the author claims this amphetamine dependency triggered latent attacks of schizophrenia, severe mania, and violent outbursts.
And it eventually culminated in a downward spiral into harder street drugs and multiple suicide attempts. It is a terrifying narrative.
It really is.
And it leads directly into what might be the most jarring, provocative argument in the entire text. And again, to you, the listener, we are reporting this impartially to explore the author's logic. We are absolutely not endorsing corporal punishment, but the author draws a direct biological comparison between chemical discipline using drugs to force focus and historical physical discipline.
Right. The text asks the reader to look back at historical educational environments. The author argues that in the past, a severe physical shock, such as a wooden spoon or a cane, provoked a natural, immediate, and massive release of dopamine and adrenaline in the child's brain.
They actually write, and I want to quote the concept exactly to capture their tone, they write that the necessary dopamine and adrenaline was released into the system under the urge to perform to survive. They are arguing that this sudden, acute physical shock forced the brain to pay attention through sheer biological terror.
And their overarching philosophical point with this really uncomfortable comparison is that modern society hasn't actually evolved past the biochemical goal.
We still want the result.
Exactly. We still desperately want that massive dopamine and adrenaline release to force an energetic child to sit quietly and pay attention to a chalkboard.
But instead of an occasional acute physical shock, which the author argues had an after effect that the body processed and eventually forgot, we have replaced it with a daily, chronic, sustained chemical shock in the form of amphetamine pills.
We are simply replacing wax with drugs. That's what the author writes.
Wow.
It is an intentionally jarring comparison designed to shock the reader into viewing these medications not as gentle, healing therapeutic tools, but as harsh systemic assaults on a developing nervous system. The author points out that in the past, if a classroom of children lost focus, windows were thrown open, kids were sent to run around a field, they did physical exercises and deep breathing to reoxygenate the brain.
But today, they are expected to sit entirely still for hours. And if their biology rebels, they are given a chemical to induce a stress state that mimics stillness.
That's the perspective, yeah.
Okay, I have a massive pushback here. I mean, I understand the author's argument against the medication, and I definitely understand the blood sugar crash theory. But if a sugary breakfast and a lack of running around a field causes this, why isn't literally every single child bouncing off the walls? Everyone eats cereal, everyone sits in a classroom.
That's a fair point.
The source seems to be saying that giving a stressed child an amphetamine is like throwing gasoline on a fire. But there are millions of kids who eat sugar and don't have ADHD. If the brain is on fire, what is actually sparking that fire in some kids and not others? There has to be a deeper structural vulnerability, right?
And that is the crucial question, and the author actually agrees with your premise. Blood sugar and environment are just the kindling. To find the actual spark, the author argues we have to look past the pharmacy, past the classroom, and dive deep down into the microscopic level of our neurochemistry.
Okay, let's go microscopic.
We have to look at how our environment is actively destroying the physical architecture of the brain.
Which brings us to the chemical invaders. The text gets incredibly granular here about how our neurons actually communicate with each other.
It does. Let's take a moment to really understand the neural synapse. The brain is made up of billions of neurons, right? But they don't actually touch each other. There is a microscopic gap between the end of one nerve cell and the beginning of the next, and that's called the synaptic cleft.
So, if they don't touch, how does the thought jump from one cell to the next? I mean, how does the message to pay attention to the teacher cross that gap?
It relies entirely on chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. When an electrical signal reaches the end of the first neuron, it triggers the release of these chemicals into the gap. They float across the tiny space and bind to specific locks called receptors on the next neuron, triggering a new electrical signal.
And the text highlights two absolute major players in this process regarding attention: glutamate and GABA.
Yes, think of glutamate as the brain's accelerator pedal. It is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. When you need to tune into a complex task, when you need to react quickly, when you need sharp focus, your brain produces glutamate.
Okay, glutamate is the gas.
Exactly. It hits the receptors on the next nerve cell and massively excites it, creating an intense flurry of electrical activity.
It revs the engine up to redline.
Right. But you cannot leave a biological engine running at redline forever. If a neuron stays fully excited for too long, it literally burns out and dies, a process called excitotoxicity.
Oh, that sounds bad.
Very bad. So to complete the action, preserve the cell, and calm the nervous system down, that excitatory glutamate needs to be rapidly converted into an entirely different molecule called GABA.
And GABA stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid, right?
Correct. If glutamate is the accelerator, GABA is the heavy brake pedal. It is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It floods the receptors, halts the electrical firing, calms the mind down, and allows us to sustain a steady, relaxed focus without burning out our circuitry.
Accelerator and brakes. A beautiful, perfectly balanced internal system. But the author's primary thesis here is that modern life, specifically modern agriculture, is actively physically dismantling the brake lines in our brains.
Yes.
And they point the finger squarely at a very specific, completely ubiquitous chemical, glyphosate.
Glyphosate is the active, functional ingredient in Roundup, the globally used Monsanto weed killer. It is sprayed on massive portions of the world's commercial food crops.
It's everywhere.
It is. The author presents a fascinating, highly detailed biochemical argument regarding how this chemical interacts with human biology. They state that the molecular structure of glyphosate is incredibly, almost perfectly similar to a natural amino acid in our bodies called glycine.
And glycine is one of the crucial building blocks needed for that braking system, right?
Yes, glycine is required to help successfully convert that excitatory glutamate into the calming GABA. But because glyphosate molecules mimic the shape of natural glycine molecules, they act as massive biological imposters.
Oh, no.
Through a process called competitive binding, the glyphosate molecules can reach the brain's receptor sites first and lock themselves in.
I love the analogy for this. It is exactly like putting a fake, slightly misshapen key into your car's ignition. It fits into the hole just enough to get stuck, but it absolutely will not turn the engine over. And worse, because the fake key is jammed in the ignition, you can't get the real key in to start the car.
That is precisely the mechanism of action the author describes. Because the glyphosate is blocking the receptor, the natural glycine cannot do its job. The immediate result is that the complex conversion process fails.
The glutamate doesn't turn into GABA.
Exactly. The brain is flooded with excitatory glutamate that cannot be converted into calming GABA. The brain is quite literally stuck with the accelerator pedal pinned to the floor and the brake lines cut. The neural synapses become wildly overstimulated, leading directly to the racing thoughts, the inability to focus on one single task, the anxiety, and the severe brain fog that we classify as ADD.
And the craziest part is it doesn't stop with agricultural weed killer. The author also brings everyday food, specifically gluten, into this neurochemical crime scene.
Yeah, this part is really interesting.
But they aren't talking about gluten causing, like, a mild tummy ache or bloating. They link gluten intolerance directly to severe, life-altering brain dysfunction.
The research they cite explores a deeply troubling autoimmune cascade. In certain individuals, consuming the gluten proteins found in wheat triggers a severe inflammatory and autoimmune response.
Hmm.
The body perceives the gluten as a dangerous invader, and the immune system goes to literal war. In the crossfire, the body accidentally produces something called anti-GAD antibodies.
Okay, we definitely need an explain. Like, I'm 5 on this. What is GAD?
GAD stands for glutamic acid decarboxylase.
Okay.
It is an enzyme, a biological catalyst, and its one specific crucial job in the brain is to facilitate the conversion of glutamate, the accelerator, into GABA, the brakes.
Wait, so if your body is producing anti-GAD antibodies because you ate a piece of bread, your own immune system is actively hunting down and destroying the exact enzyme you need to calm your brain down.
That is exactly the author's argument. The text points out research showing that in over 80% of people with celiac disease, these destructive anti-GAD antibodies are present and active. The immune system is systematically dismantling the brain's ability to produce GABA.
And the text links this severe lack of GABA to things far worse than just losing your keys or having trouble reading. They link it to severe, crippling anxiety, chronic insomnia, unexplainable panic attacks, and permanent hyperarousal. They even drop in links to terrifying neurological conditions. They mention cerebellar ataxia. What even is that?
Well, the cerebellum is the part of the brain that coordinates voluntary movements. Cerebellar ataxia is a severe loss of coordination, balance, and speech, often resembling extreme intoxication caused by damage to that specific part of the brain.
Wow.
The author also mentions stiff person syndrome, which is a rare, devastating neurological disorder characterized by progressive, severe muscle stiffness and agonizing spasms.
It sounds like the body is just locking up completely.
Because the inhibitory signals, the GABA signals that tell the muscles to relax, are gone. The author states that if something goes wrong in this neurochemical control box and the signal cannot be switched off, the entire nervous system just keeps getting revved up until it breaks. And their main point is that taking an amphetamine to smother the behavioral symptoms does absolutely nothing to fix the broken, immune-destroyed enzyme causing the actual problem.
But wait, I have a fundamental anatomical question here.
Sure.
How does a weed killer sprayed on a cornfield or a piece of wheat bread digesting in my stomach actually get up into the synapses of my brain? I thought the brain was sealed off. Isn't it protected?
It is supposed to be. And this brings us to a massive pillar of the author's paradigm, the concept of the leaky brain.
Leaky brain, okay.
A healthy human brain is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier. It is a highly selective, tightly woven membrane of endothelial cells connected by what are called tight junctions. It acts as a microscopic security checkpoint, allowing essential nutrients like oxygen and glucose to pass through to the brain tissue while aggressively blocking toxins, large molecules, and foreign chemicals from entering.
But the author argues that modern life is essentially punching massive holes in this biological fortress wall.
Yes. They list several modern factors that compromise those tight junctions. Severe physical trauma, like concussions from contact sports, is one obvious cause. But they heavily emphasize invisible environmental factors. Specifically, they point to continuous low-grade cellular inflammation caused by electromagnetic frequencies, EMFs.
So they are talking about the radiation from the cell phones we hold against our heads and the Wi-Fi routers in our homes.
Exactly. The author argues that this chronic exposure to artificial EMFs actually loosens the tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier. It creates micro-tears in the security net, exposing the delicate brain tissue directly to whatever disruptive chemicals happen to be floating in the bloodstream.
And what is floating in the bloodstream? The source is adamant that an unhappy, toxic gut directly equals an unhappy, unfocused brain.
Yes, the gut-brain connection is absolutely central to their theory. The lining of our digestive tract is also supposed to be a selective barrier, but it can become inflamed and highly permeable, a condition known as leaky gut. The tight junctions in the intestines break apart due to several modern factors.
Like the gluten intolerance we just talked about.
Yes, severe gluten intolerance is one major cause. A severe lack of healthy, diverse gut flora, which is often completely wiped out by courses of broad-spectrum antibiotics or the continuous ingestion of that same glyphosate weed killer is another. And then there's the most shocking cause the author lists, parasites.
This was the part of the text that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It brings us right back to the story we opened the show with. Parasites literally eating microscopic holes in the gut wall. They specifically mention giardia and actual tapeworms.
The text argues that parasitic infections in the digestive tract cause profound chronic inflammation. This inflammation destroys the integrity of the gut lining, allowing undigested food particles, dangerous microbes, and metabolic toxins to escape the intestines and enter the general bloodstream.
And once they're in the blood.
Once in the blood, they circulate until they reach that EMF-compromised blood-brain barrier, slip right through the holes, and wreak absolute havoc on the neural synapses.
And this is how a tapeworm cyst ends up lodged in a 7-year-old's brain, causing physical hyperactivity that gets misdiagnosed as ADHD. It perfectly crystallizes the author's entire worldview. We treat the human brain like an isolated, floating fortress, completely disconnected from the rest of the body. And we treat behavioral symptoms as if they are the actual disease. We see a kid fidgeting. We immediately assume a genetic neurotransmitter deficit, and we apply a chemical stimulant. But the source is screaming at us that the body is one massive interconnected ecosystem. If there is a chemical fire in the brain, you have to check the gut for leaks, check the environment for radiation, and check for physical invaders before you just start cutting the fire alarm wires with psychiatric medication.
It's a fundamental paradigm shift from symptom management to root cause resolution.
Which brings us to a really fascinating pivot in the modern wellness culture. Because a lot of people actually agree with this author's overall vibe. Millions of people are actively rejecting Ritalin and synthetic pharmaceuticals, and they are turning to trendy, natural, plant-based remedies to fix their brain fog.
Like CBD.
Yes, the massive explosion of CBD oil for anxiety and focus. Or the huge new trend of microdosing psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms to treat depression and ADHD. You would logically assume, based on everything we've read so far, that an alternative natural health organization like Naturefresh would be cheering this botanical revolution on.
Surprisingly, they vehemently reject these trendy natural fixes. The author states quite bluntly, and I quote, "I would never, ever administer either CBD or psilocybin to my children."
They mention they might consider it as a palliative measure for an adult in severe distress, but for kids whose brains are still developing. A hard, absolute no. Why the incredibly hard line against natural plant medicines if they hate synthetic drugs so much?
Their reasoning is based on the exact same biological mechanism of action we discussed earlier with Ritalin and receptor downregulation. The author argues that your brain doesn't care if a chemical was synthesized in a sterile pharmaceutical lab or grown organically in a sunlit field. If you are regularly flooding the delicate neural synapses with massive amounts of an external source of neurotransmitters, you're creating a dangerous dependency.
You are importing the cheap goods and shutting down the local factory.
Exactly. If you force the body to rely on external, highly concentrated plant extracts to either stimulate focus or calm down anxiety, the body's internal factories get lazy. They cease producing their own endogenous natural chemicals. The text states, this leads to drug dependence regardless of whether it is a natural or a man-made chemical. These are the facts.
So trading a legal pharmaceutical dependency for a trendy botanical dependency isn't actually fixing the root cause, it's just changing the brand of the Band-Aid.
Pretty much.
But here's where the text gets incredibly clever. The author isn't saying the active, healing compounds found in plants like cannabis are bad. In fact, they dedicate a massive, detailed portion of the text to explaining how you can get those exact same chemical benefits for absolute pennies using things you already have sitting in your kitchen pantry. I am talking about what I call the terpene cheat code.
The terpene cheat code. I like that. To understand this, we need to explain what a terpene is.
Go for it.
Terpenes are highly volatile, highly aromatic organic compounds produced by a massive variety of plants, including cannabis, but certainly not exclusively. They are an evolutionary defense mechanism. Plants develop these incredibly strong-smelling oils to deter herbivores from eating them or to attract specific predators that eat the pests attacking the plant.
So they are what give a pine tree its pine smell or a lemon its citrus smell?
Yes. And human biology has evolved receptors that interact profoundly with these specific molecules. Because terpenes are tiny lipophilic, meaning fat-soluble molecules, they can easily cross the blood-brain barrier when inhaled or ingested, directly interacting with our neural receptors to alter our neurochemistry.
Wow.
The source points out that people are currently spending an absolute fortune on highly specialized, genetically bred cannabis strains to get these specific terpenes, completely ignoring the fact that nature has provided them abundantly and cheaply elsewhere.
The list they provide is mind-blowing. Let's pick a few of the major ones and break down how they actually work. Let's start with marcene.
Marcene is a good one.
In the medical cannabis world, marcene is famous for its powerful sedative effects, reducing severe inflammation and managing chronic pain. It's often heavily recommended for patients undergoing cancer treatments. How do I get myrcene without buying a cannabis product?
The text points out that everyday mangoes are absolutely bursting with myrcene.
Mango.
Just mangoes. When you consume myrcene, it acts on the body's endogenous opioid system and enhances the effects of the GABA neurotransmitter we discussed earlier, the brain's brake system. It physically helps the brain slow down the electrical firing. The author suggests simply eating fresh mangoes to achieve this natural anti-inflammatory and calming effect.
Okay, what about caryophyllene? That's a fascinating one because it's known for powerful anxiety relief, anti-inflammatory properties, and there's even emerging research showing it has promising roles in treating alcohol addiction.
Caryophyllene is unique because it is one of the only terpenes that physically acts as a dietary cannabinoid. It binds directly to the CB2 receptors in our body's endocannabinoid system, specifically the receptors located in our peripheral organs and immune system.
Okay, so what does that mean in plain English?
It means it reduces systemic inflammation really effectively without causing any psychoactive highs. And you can find caryophyllene abundantly in black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, oregano, basil, and rosemary.
So you don't need a tincture, you just need to heavily season your pasta sauce.
Essentially, yes.
What about pine? That's the sharp, piney terpene that is famous for acting as a bronchodilator, opening up respiratory pathways, reducing inflammation, and famously stimulating short-term memory retention.
Pine acts by inhibiting an enzyme in the brain called acetylcholinesterase, which normally breaks down a memory-forming neurotransmitter. By stopping that breakdown, pine leaves more of the memory chemical available in the brain.
That's amazing.
And again, you don't need expensive extracts. The author points out it is readily available in common kitchen herbs like rosemary, basil, parsley, and the zest of orange peels.
And eucalyptol. It's known as a powerful neuroprotectant, a pain reliever, and it even slows down fungal growth in the body. How does it protect the brain?
Eucalyptol reduces neuroinflammation by suppressing specific pro-inflammatory cytokines in the brain tissue. It cools the physical inflammation down. And the author literally points to the medicine cabinet for this one, suggesting plain old eucalyptus oil or even over-the-counter Vicks VapoRub as a direct source of eucalyptol.
The overarching argument here is brilliant in its sheer simplicity. The author is asking a very practical question. Why are you spending exorbitant amounts of money and risking receptor downregulation on trendy, isolated cannabis extracts when human biology allows you to load up on spicy aromas, eat fresh tropical fruits, and use common kitchen herbs to get the exact same molecular anti-inflammatory, analgesic, and anxiety-reducing properties?
It democratizes the biochemistry.
It really does.
But the text pushes the envelope even further. It turns out we don't even need to rely on external plants to get the benefits of cannabinoids. Our own bodies are fully equipped biological factories capable of producing a completely free, highly effective high from scratch.
Right. The text dives deep into the endocannabinoid system. Our bodies literally produce endogenous messengers called endocannabinoids. We make our own internal cannabis-like molecules.
And this is a crucial distinction the author makes. We all know about endorphins, the feel-good chemicals released during a runner's high. But the author notes that large endorphin molecules cannot easily cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, because of the tight junctions we talked about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Endocannabinoids, however, are small, fat-soluble lipids. They easily penetrate the deep brain structures. They are created on demand in the postsynaptic neurons and travel backward to the presynaptic neurons, a process called retrograde signaling, to act as the ultimate biological volume dial.
Oh, volume dial. I like that.
They turn down pain signals, produce a state of profound euphoria, and just generally make us feel incredible.
But there is a major catch. You can't just buy a bottle of endocannabinoids at the health food store. You actually have to earn them through physical suffering.
You have to force the body to manufacture them through intense, sustained physical exertion. And the text is incredibly specific here. A light 10-minute stroll around the block will not trigger this biochemical cascade.
So no easy shortcuts.
None. The author specifies that to force the body to generate these healing endocannabinoids and growth hormones, you must engage in at least 30 solid minutes of strenuous, sweat-inducing cardiovascular exercise.
They break down the timeline, which is brutal. They write that for the first 30 minutes, your body is just burning off the easy glucose in your blood. You feel tired, maybe a bit miserable. But if you push past that 30-minute threshold, the blood sugar drops, the body realizes it needs to shift gears, and it triggers a massive fat-burning, brain-healing sequence.
And the cascading biological benefits of this natural internal process are staggering. The author lists them out. It dramatically lowers resting blood pressure. It forces the cells to become sensitive to insulin, again, essentially reversing insulin resistance. It massively improves the oxygen flow through the cerebral cortex. It naturally burns off the stress chemicals causing mental anxiety. And it even controls fibrinogen levels in the blood.
All right, what is fibrinogen?
Fibrinogen is a protein produced by the liver that helps blood clot. Remember how the artificial adrenaline from Ritalin makes the blood thick and ready to clot?
Oh, right, the fight or flight response.
Exactly. Sustained cardiovascular exercise naturally lowers those fibrinogen levels, thinning the blood safely and improving overall cardiovascular health. It physically reverses the damage done by chronic stress.
Okay, I fundamentally love this philosophy. It's empowering. The author is basically saying, why buy the expensive, imported, chemically processed, bottled water when you have a perfectly good, free, crystal clear, natural spring bubbling right in your own backyard?
Great analogy.
But I have to introduce a serious dose of reality here. Is it really that simple? I mean, if you are a parent dealing with a child who has crippling clinical ADHD, who is tearing the house apart, or if you are an adult drowning in such severe brain fog that you can barely remember your own email password, is the medical advice seriously just eat a mango, sprinkle some oregano on your dinner, and go for a really hard run? That feels kind of dismissive of the intense neurological reality of these conditions.
And the author actually anticipates that exact criticism. They know it's not a magical overnight fix. While changing the diet, forcing daily exercise, and utilizing kitchen terpenes are the foundational lifestyle changes, the source material does not leave the reader hanging.
Good, because people need actionable steps.
They provide highly specific, targeted biochemical protocols for pulling a severely damaged brain out of the fog, repairing the physical tissue, and actively flushing out the toxins we discussed earlier. They aren't just waving their hands and saying, eat well. They're providing a step-by-step chemical roadmap.
Which brings us to the final major section of the text, building a resilient brain. Let's synthesize the action plans and detox protocols laid out across these NatureFresh articles, because they get incredibly granular about how to force those chemical invaders out of the body.
Let's start with the biggest invader they identified, glyphosate, the weed killer that mimics our amino acids and jams the brain's braking system. The author outlines a highly specific remedy called the glycine flush.
How do you flush a chemical that's already stuck in your neuroreceptors?
It relies on the biological principle of competitive inhibition. Since the glyphosate molecules are occupying the glycine receptors, the strategy is to absolutely saturate the bloodstream with pure, natural glycine.
Oh, I see. By overwhelmingly outnumbering the fake keys with real keys.
Exactly. The body eventually dislodges the glyphosate and flushes the toxic chemical out through the kidneys and urine.
The protocol in the text recommends starting with a massive dose, 4 grams of a pure glycine powder supplement twice a day for a few weeks to initiate the flush. Once the initial toxic burden is cleared, they suggest dropping the maintenance dose down to 1 gram twice a day. The author claims this specific flush directly leads to vastly improved concentration, stabilized moods, and deeper sleep as the brain's GABA braking system comes back online.
Next, the text addresses heavy metal toxicity. They specifically target environmental aluminum, which they argue accumulates in the fatty tissue of the brain over a lifetime and severely disrupts the electrical voltage of the cell walls, leading to cognitive decline.
Wait, how do you pull a heavy metal out of brain tissue?
For an aluminum detox, the author recommends heavily increasing the intake of dietary silica. Silica acts somewhat like a microscopic molecular sponge in the digestive tract and bloodstream. It has a high chemical affinity for aluminum, binding to it and carrying it out of the body safely.
The text lists accessible sources for this silica, including food-grade diatomaceous earth, kaolin clay, bentonite clay, and zeolite powders.
And crucially, the protocol pairs these silica clays with natural chelating agents, substances that grab onto metals. They recommend consuming citric acid from fresh lemon juice alongside raw apple cider vinegar to help mobilize the aluminum out of the deep tissue so the silica can catch it.
Okay, so that's how you pull the bad stuff out. But what about repairing the physical damage left behind? The text talks a lot about fat-soluble neurotoxins that literally dissolve and damage the fatty myelin sheaths and cell membranes of the brain.
To rebuild that physical architecture, the brain desperately needs raw materials. The author recommends heavily replenishing the body's supply of phospholipids.
Phospholipids?
Yeah, they are the specialized fat molecules that make up the protective, selectively permeable bilayer of every single cell membrane in your body, especially in the brain.
And to provide those raw materials, they point to a very specific historical dietary intervention called the Budwig Protocol.
Right. The Budwig protocol was originally developed in the 1950s by a German biochemist named Dr. Johanna Budwig, initially as a cellular repair mechanism for cancer patients. The author adapted here specifically for neurorepair. The core of the protocol involves vigorously blending raw, cold-pressed flaxseed oil, which is incredibly rich in omega-3 fatty acids, with organic low-fat cottage cheese.
Why mix oil and cheese together? That sounds terrible.
It's a chemical reaction. The sulfur-rich proteins in the cottage cheese bind to the highly unsaturated fatty acids in the flaxseed oil, making those essential fats water-soluble. This allows the body to absorb them instantly and transport them directly to the brain, where they are used to repair the damaged cell membranes and restore the smooth flow of electrical signals between neurons.
It's fascinating how specific the biochemistry gets. But the author also recognizes that sometimes you just don't have months to rebuild a cell membrane. Sometimes a teenager just needs to sit down and study for a major exam right now. So they offer several quick fixes for immediate cognitive energy, explicitly designed to replace the need for an amphetamine pill.
For a rapid, safe energy boost without the sinister sympathetic nervous system side effects, they suggest a sublingual approach. They recommend dissolving vitamin B12 and folic acid lozenges directly under the tongue immediately before a study period.
Because taking it under the tongue bypasses the digestive tract entirely, sending those B vitamins directly into the bloodstream to help the brain produce energy molecules.
Exactly. They also suggest utilizing the olfactory system we discussed earlier, simply rubbing a high-quality peppermint essential oil on the pulse points of the wrists, or aggressively chewing a strong, sugar-free peppermint gum sends immediate stimulating signals through the olfactory bulb to wake up the brain's arousal centers safely.
And there's a brilliantly simple tip for stabilizing that blood sugar crash we talked about in the very beginning. They recommend drinking a large glass of water with a tiny pinch of cream of tartar mixed in.
Cream of tartar.
Yeah, because cream of tartar is incredibly high in natural potassium, and the author links adequate potassium levels directly to helping the liver smoothly and steadily release that stored glucose, preventing the violent adrenaline panic response.
The source material also briefly mentions a few specifically formulated natural remedies available in their region. They reference a botanical formula called Hyperbam, originally developed by a Professor Serfontaine, and a homeopathic preparation called Bright Spark, which they claim has successfully helped thousands of hyperactive children calm down, sit still, and concentrate in school without ever touching a prescription drug.
But here is where the text takes a sudden, incredibly profound turn. After pages and pages of complex biochemistry, amino acids, and cellular membranes, the author steps entirely back from the microscope. They shift gears from treating the physical body into treating the emotional reality of the child. They outline a psychological protocol. And honestly, this might be the most touching, resonant part of the entire deep dive.
It is a vital component of their holistic paradigm. The author argues that children are incredibly deeply intuitive creatures. They absorb the energetic environment of their homes. And very often, the text argues, the child who simply cannot pay attention to their schoolwork, the child who is tearing apart the classroom, is actually a child who is desperately crying out for emotional connection and attention from their parents or their teachers.
They write that bad behavior, being difficult, throwing tantrums, or being downright obnoxious is a highly effective, primitive survival mechanism to ensure they are noticed. The author points out a heartbreaking reality for a neglected child. Even getting a physical hiding or a screaming reprimand confirms that they are at least being seen. If they feel emotionally ignored, they will instinctively act out to force a connection, even a negative one.
If we connect this emotional reality back to the neurobiology we've been discussing, the author isn't just diagnosing a chemical deficit in the brain. They are diagnosing a profound connection deficit in the home.
Yes, and their solution is completely free and purely behavioral. They are actively urging parents to establish a relentless, positive reward system, to consciously use kind words, physical affection, genuine praise, and constant acknowledgement of good behavior. Because praise isn't just a soft psychological parenting trick. The author argues that the feeling of being loved, of feeling positive, and being praised literally, physically raises the dopamine levels in a child's brain naturally.
One small success is a great step towards a clear head. That's what the author writes. They urge parents to anticipate the emotional needs of the child, to be one step ahead of the bad behavior. They advise parents to hug, cuddle, and physically connect with their kids before the child is forced to ask for that attention by throwing a textbook across the room.
It is such a beautifully, comprehensively holistic perspective. The author is demanding that we treat the child's physical environment, treat the chemicals on their dinner plate, treat the cellular architecture of their brain, and treat the emotional needs of their heart all at the exact same time. It moves the conversation completely away from how do we fix this broken machine to how do we nurture this entire interconnected ecosystem.
Which brings us to an incredibly important structural and legal element of this source material. Whenever we are dealing with alternative health protocols, especially ones that challenge the deeply entrenched conventional medical models as aggressively and unapologetically as this text does, we have to look closely at the official legal disclaimers surrounding the information.
Absolutely. The NatureFresh text includes a very comprehensive, very specific, and quite legally binding medical disclaimer that we need to share with you, the listener, to provide the full context of how this information is published.
The official regulatory disclaimer required by SAHPRA, which is the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, is explicitly stated on their materials. It reads, "This unregistered medicine has not been evaluated by the SAHPRA for its efficacy, quality, safety, or intended use." But the author doesn't just paste the legal requirement, they elaborate on their own personal philosophy regarding bodily autonomy and medical responsibility.
Yeah, they write very bluntly, you alone are responsible for your life, your health, and well-being. They explicitly state that all the material provided in these articles, Q&As, and protocols is strictly for informational purposes. It may not, under any circumstances, be construed as formal medical advice, and they reiterate that only a licensed medical doctor is legally qualified to make a diagnosis or prescribe treatment.
They clarify that their physical products are legally classed as foods or food supplements, not pharmaceuticals, and that consumers utilize them entirely at their own risk. They even inject a bit of dark, cynical humor into their legal pages, noting that they have not yet found a safe form of air to breathe, but will keep trying.
That's funny.
And they issue stark warnings against the global invasion of genetically modified, chemically drenched foods.
And there's this one quirky, highly specific detail in their corporate endorsement policy that I found fascinating. They state that they outright refuse to pay the exorbitant fees required for certified organic logos or fancy eco-certifications, arguing that it just artificially raises the price of the supplements for desperate people. But they do proudly carry exactly one official logo on their products.
Operation Smile. The organization commits a dedicated portion of their advertising budget not to marketing, but to sponsoring complex facial surgeries for children born with cleft palate deformities. It is the only external endorsement they actively promote, which speaks volumes about the underlying ethos of the organization.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and look back at the massive amount of ground we've covered in this deep dive today. We started by challenging the entire diagnostic framework, looking at how childhood ADHD and adult brain fog might not be separate diseases at all, but just different addresses in the exact same neurochemical neighborhood.
We explored the terrifying biological mechanics of hypoglycemic dementia, tracking how a simple sugary breakfast leads to a severe insulin spike, a starving brain, and an adrenaline-fueled panic response that completely mimics clinical hyperactivity.
We examined the author's intense, controversial opposition to the Ritalin pipeline and explored their deeply provocative argument that modern society hasn't evolved past physical discipline, but has merely traded the physical shock of a wooden spoon for a daily, chronic chemical shock to the nervous system.
We zoomed all the way into the microscopic neural synapse, detailing how environmental invaders like glyphosate and gluten might be biologically destroying the GA enzyme, actively dismantling our brain's internal GABA braking system and leaving us perpetually stuck on the accelerator. We even discovered that a fidgeting child might actually be reacting to the severe systemic inflammation of a leaky gut or a literal physical parasite.
We explored the fascinating biological reasons why the author rejects trendy natural fixes like highly concentrated CBD and psilocybin, opting instead to hack the endocannabinoid system using the everyday terpenes found in common mangoes and black pepper, and teaching us how to earn our own endogenous highs through strenuous, sweat-inducing exercise.
And finally, we walk step by step through their highly specific biochemical detox protocols, flushing out toxic glyphosate using competitive inhibition with pure glycine, pulling heavy aluminum out of the brain tissue with with silica clays and rebuilding damaged cell membranes with the Budwig protocol, while never losing sight of the vital emotional protocol of praising, loving, and deeply connecting with our kids to naturally boost their dopamine levels.
It is a massive, incredibly complex, deeply fascinating alternative paradigm that challenges almost every single facet of the conventional pill for every ill medical model. And it leaves us with a profound, lingering question to mull over as we close.
If our modern industrialized environment, an environment completely saturated with glowing blue screens, highly refined sugars, microscopic agricultural chemicals like glyphosate, and intense chronic emotional stressors, is constantly relentlessly triggering our brains into a state of hazy fog or hyperactive fight-or-flight survival mode. Are conditions like ADHD actually genetic disorders at all? Or are they just perfectly natural, completely logical, biological adaptations to a world that has become fundamentally unnatural?
Wow, that changes how you view everything. It means the metaphorical X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning isn't broken just because we don't know how to read it. It's broken because we're trying to use it to diagnose the completely wrong disease. We've been staring at the brain looking for a broken bone when we should have been looking deeply at the quality of the water we're drinking, the food we're eating, and the environments we are creating for each other. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep journey today. Keep questioning the world around you, stay endlessly curious, and always, always keep seeking out the why behind the what.